Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 1989 film After Midnight. It's my first time seeing it, and it feels like, now maybe someone can fill me in on this, it feels like a made-for-TV movie, because there's not a whole lot of gore to it. It's really pretty light on the actual scares and suspense, to be honest. I don't like this film. I will say, though, that said, that I'm not a fan of this. I think this movie sucks. It gave me some good kind of nostalgia feelings for films and shows from back in the 1989 era. You know, it really does feel like a film that is in that time period that bridges the gap between the 80s and the 90s, that kind of transition period. But the film's not very well done. It is anthology, obviously, if you've seen it before. And I really do like anthology films, so I was pretty excited for this because, you know, bite-sized horror, it's a lot of fun. Not as much with this. There was some decent conceptual ideas for some of the stories, but it just didn't really come together all that well. But obviously, I'll talk about what I did and did not like. Obviously, I didn't like more than I liked, and I am going to give star ratings to each of the individual stories as well as an overall for the film itself. So this one was written and directed by Jim Wheat and Ken Wheat, who also wrote The Silent Scream, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, which I have a special place in my heart for that. I actually own that, and Caravan of Courage. Those are films that my parents had taped off of cable when I was very young, and I watched them all the time. Like, they're not great films, but, like, you know, it's a nostalgia thing for me, like, my childhood. They also wrote Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, The Fly 2, and Pitch Black. So they wrote some decent stuff. Not this. This was the film debut for Marg Helgenberger, who you might know from Bad Boys, Species, Species 2, Fire Down Below, Mr. Brooks, and CSI. Most people probably know her most from CSI because she was on a lot of episodes of that. But she is one of those actresses who's had a lot of roles and a lot of like TV roles, you know, an episode of a show here, an episode there. So if you saw her and you didn't know, you didn't know her name, so you finally saw her, you'd be like, ah, yes, very familiar person. So, and she did a good job. I really think that she did the best she could with the role that she had in this film, but yeah, there wasn't a whole lot to work with, unfortunately. The segment for the Old Dark House, actually, they used 4 different houses to comprise that, which seems like way too much work for what this film is, let's be honest. This really does just feel like a film that got kind of slapped together and didn't have a whole lot of inspiration behind it. Maybe it was a rush job, I don't know. The music during the opening credits has a very dark, mischievous vibe to it. I did like that. It actually sounded very kind of Richard Band-esque, that music. Not done by Richard Band, but it kind of had a little bit of that sound. So I'm going to start with Allison's story, which is kind of like the wraparound story. I'll finish that one out, and then I'll do all the stories after that. So in Allison's story, Russ is such a turd that you know that he's going to die. I figured that he was going to die much earlier than he ended up dying, maybe even in the classroom in the very beginning. But no, it ends up being much later at the hands of Professor Derek, which kind of a weird name. But Professor Derek, when he loses it, basically, but in the end, as we find out, it's actually just all a dream, which I know it was less cliche back then, but man, it is tough to experience films that everything was a dream in the end. It's just such a lame concept. Professor Derek is intense with all his talk about understanding fear. He's really over the top. The actor who did Professor Derek, you can find enjoyment in that performance as like a so bad it's good performance, and I personally did. But if you want to approach this film from like being serious and trying to like get involved and be scared with it, not going to happen, especially not with Professor Derek, because man, his acting is really over the top. His intensity is too much. The way he delivers lines, he's going for way too much impact. It's kind of like he's a theater-trained actor who's trying to adapt that for, in this case, I think a TV movie, honestly. But yeah, don't know for sure. Gotta love the old school zoom in on Russ's face when the bullet is pulled out. How, you know, Russ was saying like, oh, you wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't be scared because I know that even with that gun, you know, you wouldn't do anything. and then Professor Derek pulls out the bullet, and then Russ gets scared, and they do that like zoom in, very of its time. There are a few other things that show up in this film that are very much of their time. One of the big things I'll talk about later is, that slow motion. Like, it's the weird slow motion where, like, it's got kind of like tracers on it. Like, it looks terrible. It looks like choppy, and like people are kind of like, they have tracers behind them, basically. So great that they had Russ pee himself. I did like that aspect. I didn't think they were going to go there. It's some people may say it's a little bit over the top with the, juvenile humor, but I appreciate it. I didn't think they would go that far. I think you just get pissed off and, act out or leave or whatever. But no, he peed himself. But yeah. I like that when Professor Derek shoots himself, the blood actually comes out of the back of his head when he's pointing the gun from under his chin. Obviously, I know it's a joke. It ends up being a trick where he, sets it off on the back of his head. But I guess in the moment, people who are there are just reacting to the craziness of things happening because they're not expecting it instead of actually paying attention. So they wouldn't have really noticed, oh, it fired out of the back of his head, not the top of his head. Something doesn't make sense here. But from an audience standpoint, you could tell that something was very off. It was either the filmmaking is really bad or it was a trick. And it ended up being a trick, obviously. If Allison was so afraid of even attending class, why would she go to Professor Derek's house? That's a big question. Now, I guess you can end up explaining it in the end as, well, it was all a dream. And there are a lot of times where you don't necessarily do what you would do in real life in a dream. So you can explain it that way. But when you're watching it for the first time, you're like, she's very concerned about going to this class in the first place. Why would she do this extra thing at the professor's house who's, presented himself as very unhinged at this point and has probably made her even more fearful. And there's not even extra credit that would come from it. Like, it's literally for no reason. I guess they would say it's because the friend really wanted to go, but I guess Allison doesn't really have an opinion of her own. She gives into peer pressure pretty easily, is what it seems like. Not a bad idea to have the storytelling as the wraparound story, but why did this have to happen at Professor Derek's house? I mean, it really could have happened, like, anywhere. It's just weird that it happened at his house. It's weird how they get people to his house, like, everything predicating people actually going there. It's just, I don't know. It's lazy writing. It's not great writing, let's be honest. I do like the scene where lightning reveals that Russ is against the house with an axe. That was a really cool visual moment. I really did enjoy that one. And the way he's kind of, like, pressed up against it, like, ooh, here comes some fun. Now, it would have been a lot better, I think, if he just would have gone around and just been wielding the axe willy-nilly and taking out anyone and everyone, and then we could get a bunch of gore, some nice viscera, some good practical effects, but no. And that's what leads me to believe this was probably made for TV, or it was just so low budget that they just could not really do much of any practical effects. Although they could do this massive person on fire scene, which was kind of cool. And why does nobody help Professor Derek? They all just stand there. Once again, I guess you could point to the fact that it's actually a dream or a nightmare. But if it was when you're watching it, you think it's kind of reality. You're like, why is nobody doing anything? Like, literally, Russ is maybe not intending to kill him, probably trying to scare him, but it's dangerous. And he's doing stuff with fire, and he's got him hanging upside down, and he has an axe, and it's just like, someone would have been like, no, we're not doing this. But no, everyone just stands there and just checks it out. They're just like, oh, okay. Or maybe it was just a situation where they were kind of like, well, maybe Russ is in on it with Professor Derek, and this is all part of their fear thing. I don't know. Wow, the professor swinging an axe while on fire is a pretty crazy scene. Probably, well, not probably, definitely the best scene of the film. Hands down. He's on fire for quite a while, just chopping that axe into Russ's body. That was cool. 100% the best part of that film, because there's not a lot of great stuff in it. I also really did like the stop motion animation that they did with the skeleton version of Professor Derek wielding the axe as Allison's being chased through all the sets of the different stories that were told. And it's at that point that obviously we start being like, dream situation here maybe. And yes, that's exactly what it ends up being. But I thought the look of the skeleton wielding the axe was pretty cool. I did like that. It was all dream, lame. Now that said, for the segment of Allison's story, I'm giving it out of 5 stars with half stars and play 2 stars. There was enough interesting stuff and fun stuff to give it 2 stars, but overall not great. Then we move to the segment The Old Dark House. Now, of course, in this one, a flat tire happens outside of a creepy house on a desolate road. Of course, a lot of cliches going on here. There's a lot of cliches that pop up in this film, obviously, especially, very of its time. Characters just doing things for the convenience of the writing, to get the story where they're trying to go. Happens a lot in this film, obviously. All the back and forth between the characters of Kevin and Joan feels like they're wasting time. This definitely, in particular, well, not just this one, a lot of the stories, pretty much all the stories, felt like they were so slowly paced that they were intentionally done so to hit a certain runtime. So maybe they were trying to fill the runtime for TV. I don't know, but that was also a thing back then. It's still a thing now where people feel like they have to hit a certain runtime with films, but you can really feel it here. You don't feel it for every single film, but you really feel it here. It's kind of excruciatingly slow at times, let's be honest. I do like how Joan says it's fine to break and enter because it's an emergency. Your car breaking down is not an emergency that means that you can break into someone's house. Like, again, like with the characters, with how like ridiculous the characters are, it's definitely not rooted in reality. As we can tell, this is not great writing, obviously. The characters just do and say things for no reason, really. It's just like, yeah, we can break and enter because we have a flat tire. Yes, tell the police that. It's dark, there are bugs, a grandfather clock ominously chimes, and are there any more cliches? Yes. There are a lot of cliches in this one in particular, and then we get to what I was talking about, that slow motion shot of when Kevin is actually going to lop off Joan's head. Now, I like the idea of where they took the story, where she was playing this elaborate prank, especially because I just watched the movie April Fool's Day a few weeks ago, but I like that, and then he ends up killing her. It's just the way they did it. Like, the pacing is terrible, and then the fact that the shot of when he lops her head off, like that should have been a lot quicker because it doesn't look great. So delaying it, prolonging something that doesn't look great, just makes it look even worse, obviously. But yeah, there is value in this as being like a so bad it's good. This is definitely a film you could throw on with friends and make fun of and not have to pay too much attention to. Moral of the story for this one, don't pull pranks on people. Yeah, just don't do it. And I do have to say that shame on Joan. I mean, I'm not going to say she got what she deserved, but she caused her own demise by not critically thinking and thinking, man, if I make this way too real and way too serious, something could go wrong. Something characters talk about in April Fool's Day as well. Now, The Old Dark House, I'm going to give 1.5 stars. 1.5 stars. Decent concept, and, the ending is a good idea, it's just not done well. Now moving on to A Night on the Town. This one is terrible, terrible, terrible. Penelope Sudrow is in this one, and people may know her best as Jennifer from the film Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. She's the one that is welcomed to prime time by Freddy Krueger. That's, like one of almost everyone's favorite line, especially from that film. Maybe of all of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I mean, it's certainly one that I love, but it was cool to see her in this because I've seen her in stuff before. She, again, just like Marg Helgenberger, she did what she could with the role. It's just a terrible role. Oh man, the music in the club. When they get to the club at first, it is the most like insanely generic, non-copyrighted music of the time, which made me laugh. That is one of those so good it's bad moments. The old low on gas issue, which obviously it's talked about initially. So it's Chekhov's low gas light or engine light, low on gas, whatever. Chekhov's low on gas idea. It's just like Chekhov's gun. If they show you the gun in a film, It's going to be used later. They talk about there not being much gas. It ends up being used later, and that's why they end up having to get out of the car while they're being chased by the dogs and run, which is obviously not ideal. The guy in the abandoned gas station is effectively creepy. I thought his performance was really good. They made him look very creepy. He played the character in a very unsettling manner. So that was cool. I just wish that he was a bigger part of it, or just everything. Like the dogs themselves, I didn't even think were that scary. It's not a good idea. Like the dog thing wasn't great. It would have just been better if it's just this guy and he's like an axe-wielding maniac or something like that. It would have been a lot better because his performance was pretty good. So I just needed more of that. And there was this weird kind of like digital sound, like a very 80s driven digital sound that was going on in it. And I don't know if that was supposed to be something in the film or if that was just a part of the soundtrack at that point, but it was very odd. It kind of, I was going to say it took me out of the moment, but I wasn't ever really that invested because it's not that great, but just weird. Just some weird stuff. The guy riding on top of the car and stabbing it was fun. Again, like pretty much everything having to do with that creepy dude was good. It's just everything else. Literally just everything else was not. These women are very good at wasting time as the dogs end up closing in on them. I'm talking about obviously the part where they crash the car initially, but they don't know if it runs yet or not. They haven't checked that, but they are taking the time to argue about should we get out and run, should we not get out and run. No, just try the friggin' car because you didn't do it yet. Another one of those things where they're just wasting time. Like the dogs were pretty far away. They had a decent amount of time to either start running, get over a fence, or drive. But no, they just sit there quibbling with each other, and you're just like, move. And then the low gas comes into play, yeah. And then that's where they end up having to run. They might be in trouble for torching that building, by the way. In the end, I don't think you can just torch a building with dogs in it because people are not going to be happy about that. I mean, you could say the dogs were chasing you, but it's still not a good look. Like, no one's necessarily going to believe that. If you burn down a building with dogs in it, I don't care who you are. People are not going to think you're a good person. Just saying. But that was a big building, too. And they just, like, blow the whole thing up. And it's in flames. It's like, well, pretty over the top. They could have just, trapped the dogs inside and left. Maybe a better option. So this one, as you can tell, I thought was the worst. Night on the Town gets 1 star. 1 star. And they get that, it would have been like half or 0 because they get the 1 for that dude. Like, he did a good job. Then we get to the final story, which is All Night Operator. This is the one with Mark Helgenberger in it. She played the character of Alex, and with the introduction of Alex initially having crutches, you know that that's actually going to end up coming into play, kind of like the low gas in the previous story. It just serves to make her more vulnerable. It slows her down. So if there are any chase scenes, you know that she really can't get anywhere too effectively, and she's in more danger. It just kind of ups the danger factor when it comes to her, and especially the fact that it's introduced early, you know she's quite vulnerable. So that's done in film a lot, so yeah. Then you add in that Alex is alone at night at her job. That's another thing. Well, she's not 100% alone because they have the night watchman down in the lobby, but then once he gets dispatched of, or it's coming, basically because he finds that phone off the hook, and then Alex is basically like, oh no, he's in the building. That he's not going to matter, basically. He's not going to save her at all. So she's on her own at this point. So I think in this instance, they did an okay job of kind of like building danger around Alex. But once again, it takes too long. This dude who's calling in and being really creepy and threatening, he spends a lot of time in that payphone booth. And it was he making all those phone calls from that payphone, because that would get expensive. It's weird. It's weird. And like, he's just hanging out in a payphone booth. It's like, all right. I mean, I guess, he wasn't thinking properly, but yeah. You get the idea this guy projects onto many women because of the line that he says, "You're just like her." When he says it to Alex, he already killed that woman that he was leaving messages for. He strangled her with the cord, which awful death scene. Really not good. We needed some blood. And there wasn't any. But then he says to Alex, he's like, you're just like her. So you can tell that, like, it's not even necessarily about specific women. It's just about his hatred of women, or one particular woman who he then looks at every single woman and kind of like views them as that person, or just being like that person. So that aspect of it was kind of interesting, but, you know, it didn't really end up coming to fruition past that. When Alex's boss flops out of the elevator, what killed her? Like, how did she die? Because there's just, like, some blood around her mouth. Like, what is that? Like, what was her neck snapped? Like, was she hugged to death? Was she stabbed? Like, you see no actual, like, wounds. You just see some blood around her mouth. Like, laziness to the nth degree. Like, they can't just, like, throw blood, like, on her shirt or something to be like, oh, she got stabbed. There's just, like, there's some blood. It's a stab wound. No. Like, they couldn't even go to that trouble, and that's easy. They were just like, nah, just put some blood around her mouth. It's all good. And after all that, they leave it on a cliffhanger. You don't even know if Alex gets away or not. It's like, come on. I did like the little portion where she's back in her little, well, when she was in her little work area, and there's that other room with the sheet of glass, and the light goes on, and he's behind the glass. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like, nice reveal to, like, significantly up the danger really fast and, you know, start a chase scene. But you can't get some sort of resolution, and it doesn't make sense either, because this is someone telling the story. It's a true story. So she should know what the ending of the story is if she's telling the story, especially because how did she hear of the story? There's no way that story gets out to anyone, and no one knows the resolution. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a weird way to end it, especially because it's people telling stories. So that story, All Night Operator, is getting a 1.5 star rating. Also not great. So actually, overall, I averaged it out, and After Midnight as an entire film gets 1.5 stars. It is not good, but I would love to hear if people have differing opinions. Do you feel nostalgic for this film, or are you in agreement with me that it's just not worth time, really? Or it's so bad it's good that you can just put it on the background and kind of just make fun of it. Go ahead and put it down in the comments, good, bad, in between. Let me know a sentence or two how you feel about it. But also do me a favor, hit subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It really does mean a lot to me. It keeps me motivated to do this, because at this point when I'm doing it, I'm not getting any sort of money or anything. So this is, you know, subscribers, seeing new people subscribe really does keep me motivated. I've been doing this for a while. I think like 4 years at this point. Also hit the notification bell button, because then you know when I'm putting up new videos. And speaking of 4, I'm doing 4 videos per week, which I think is a good amount. And then you'll know immediately when I'm putting them up, so you can watch them as soon as possible. You know, not necessarily that you want to, but if you do, that does help out the visibility of my videos, so that would be cool. But anyway, at any rate, thank you very much for taking your time to check out this particular video. And until next time, keep it brutal.